Chapter 12. It wasn't until I was in Japan that I heard what my hook had done to him. GCW released him on medical grounds. Standing backstage in the middle of Pawnee Rock's pre-show preparation, it felt like minutes ago. I lingered in the hallway until the sound of his walking stick clicking on concrete had subsided before heading to the weights room. Brick was spotting for Delia as she bench-pressed the weight of a small European car. "Hey, Brick. You remember me?" I asked. "Of course. You were huge here whenever I was a kid." Brick replied with a smile that was as wide as it was genuine. I explained that Frank thought it would be nice if I got together with them both, as they'd been working closely with Nina over the last few months. Delia punched the weights up into the rest before sitting upright, panting like a dog in a hot car. "You're a private detective now, right?" I nodded. "Yeah." Nina said something about that. She was always talking about the old days with you and Marty Monroe before. You know. I did. "Did you travel with Nina to Burlington?" "No, we were meant to, but she phoned in sick the show before. I thought it was bull personally, but it's none of my business," said Delia, as the redness in her face softened. "What's none of your business?" I asked. Delia looked me over and smiled. "You're working now, aren't you?" "I'm just trying to understand what happened to my friend. What was none of your business?" I lifted a 50-pound weight and began curling to make myself look more casual. "We shouldn't be talking about this, Del," said Brick. He had the demeanor of the kid on lookout while the rest of the crew smoked behind the bike shed. Delia sighed. You could tell she had had to navigate his risk radar more times than she cared to recall, then said, "The last few weeks she was talking on the phone a lot. She was definitely arranging to meet up with someone in Burlington. So when she phoned in sick the night before, I kinda knew it was bullshit." "That's probably what that big fight with Wyatt was about," Brick offered. "Why would that have her fighting with Wyatt?" "'Cause they were banging." Delia's words were like a blast to the gut. "You know this for certain?" I jabbed a finger down towards the ground as if to physically put the dot at the bottom of my question mark. "I walked in on them," Delia said with a nod. Nina's voicemail came to mind. "I wanted to ask you to look into Dawson. I asked if they ever got a name for the person Nina was on the phone with and struck out immediately. Whoever this Dawson guy was, she had a bad enough feeling about him that she wanted me to dig into his life. Maybe the native woman Luann saw her with knew more about him. Maybe he followed her to Nina's room, or maybe she led him there. Maybe she was just a party girl looking to keep the night going and had nothing to do with her, or Dawson, or any of this." I dropped the weight and walked out of the room. On my way out, Brick asked what I wanted to do with them on the show. Delia told me not to worry, that she and Brick would come up with something, and I wasn't to fret too much about the creative side of things. It was one night. She had it covered. She understood that regardless of what I said, I was on the job, and part of that job was now wringing answers out of Wyatt's neck. I found him in the middle of the ring as the production guys tied off turnbuckles. Frank and Rochelle sat in the rafters above us, like malevolent demigods of the McGuire religion. All-seeing, all-hearing. I trusted my presence in-ring wouldn't pull them out of the job at hand as they attempted to cobble together tribute footage for a fallen angel, and approached with both hands by my side. "Everything okay, Jack?" Wyatt asked. "Why were you so upset earlier?" I replied. "I know you don't think much of me, but I'm not a monster. It was Nina, for Christ's sake. We'd known each other for years." "So it had nothing to do with the fact that you two were messing around?" Wyatt lost a few inches after that. He seemed to shrink inside himself as the shame set upon him. He walked to the ropes and leant on the top one. purposefully giving his back to the room in the sky and putting as much distance between him and the help as possible. It was supposed to be just a bit of fun. She'd fooled around with Jimmy and Luke in the past, and you know how the locker room talks. You don't know what you're missing and all that. He trailed off. She was my friend, Wyatt. Not a goddamn trading card, so pick that next word wisely, I growled. That's just it. It stopped being a bit of fun for me, at least. If he was selling, then he was better than I gave him credit. And that's what the fight was about? You were jealous? She was always on the phone to someone else? I was, yeah. Jealous enough to do something about it. He shook off the implication so completely it nearly caused a scene. I put a hand on his arm and leant against the rope alongside him, then asked, "You ever hear the name Dawson?" "Is that who she was calling?" he queried. "I don't know." "What was she using?" I asked. "I don't know." "She was in your bed most nights when you were on the road and you don't know what she was using," I pushed. "Look, every once in a while we'd find a guy who knew a guy and we'd get a little blow. Recreational." "So you know of no injuries she was nursing?" "I mean, she threw her back in Memphis last year, but she took a few days off and came back strong." "You're sure you never heard her mention a guy called Dawson?" Wyatt said no, and I believed him. I left him in the ring and headed back to the locker room. As I entered, two of the new boys were talking over ancient history. They had been college wrestlers once, real grapple guys with the cauliflower ears and everything. I didn't know their real names, but they wrestled as a tag team called the Riker Brothers. Brett Riker was the bigger of the two. Even his chin had a bicep. Sam was half a foot shorter, but wide as an RV. "So who's the other guy?" asked Brett. "The cripple?" "Come on, guy. That's Marvelous Marty Monroe, and the big bitch that was in here earlier is the guy that—" "Crippled him?" "No, that's like some motorcycle injury, but he did punch him so hard he made him spastic," said Sam. I grabbed hold of the wider Riker and shoved him up against a row of lockers. He went to fight back, and I put my fist through the front of the locker next to his head to prove I was serious. That stilled him. "Jack!" barked a familiar voice. I turned around to face the door. Marty was there, leaning on his stick and looking mad as hell, but only with me. I shoved the Riker boy out of my way. "You going to hit him too?" Marty asked. "He was—" I heard. "I don't need you fighting my battles. And you gnome-looking little shithawk. If I didn't need this stick to walk, I'd snap it in two and shove both parts up your ass and pull you apart. I helped make this company. You're just a tenant." Marty hobbled out of the locker room. I gave pursuit. Halfway down the corridor, I caught him up and spun him around before taking his cane off him, so he had to talk to me. His fists were clenched and whiter than Dover rock. If he decided he had a receipt to give to me, I was okay with that. "Can we talk?" I asked. "Give me my stick." "What happened to your leg?" "Give me my goddamn stick," barked Marty. "I'm sorry, okay. I wanted to hurt you, but I didn't want to fucking hurt you," I confessed. "Well, you did, and now I get to work in Puerto Rico for a guy whose most redeeming trait is he's a fucking racist." I handed him his cane, which allowed him to no longer have to balance himself with the wall. I asked, "The money I sent from Japan, did you keep it?" "Of course I did. I hated you, but money is money. I'm not a fucking idiot." Marty responded with the hint of a smile. "So you don't hate me anymore?" I asked. "I mean, I took your money and bought myself a Harley, so Sonia maybe hates you more than me. What are we even doing here?" "Paying tribute to a friend. We could do that at her funeral in Santa Barbara." I pulled my hair back from my face and tied it in a bun. "You stayed in touch with Nina. Did she ever mention someone in Burlington called Dawson?" I told Marty about Nina's voicemail and how she'd skipped out of an event night to go to Burlington a day early and meet up with a native woman and maybe this Dawson guy. The marvelous one took it on board, chewed it over, and once processed, offered, "Are you sure she said Dawson? I mean, it could have been about Brick. Isn't he Don's son?" I hadn't actually intended on seeing through any bit that Delia and Brick had come up with. However, Marty's take on Nina's final message thrust me into a comedy bit with a couple of kids that were, in all likelihood, never getting over. I found Brick and Delia backstage with Rita Raines and Mr. Magnificent working through the beats. Delia was overjoyed to see my 6'6" frame coming her way. She rushed me with more joy than I'd initially thought possible from her. She had a great idea for a bit that would work in the rivalry her and Brick were building with Rita and Magnificent, and would allow me to slip in seamlessly. Magnificent would enter the ring minus his trademark cape. He'd blame his valet for losing it, and spend 5 minutes reading Rita the Riot Act before I would appear at the top of the entrance. No longer the lone wolf Jack Gecko. I'd walk to the ring explaining how it wasn't misplaced, but in fact had been stolen by Brick Hansen in an attempt to woo Delia Payne, and in doing so give my rubber stamp to their rivalry. But that wasn't the best bit. "The best bit is the name, Jack. Wait till you hear. You're going to love this." Delia bounced on the spot like a giddy little space hopper. "Ask me what your name is." "What's his name, Delia?" Marty asked as he somehow managed to sneak up on us. "Headlock Holmes. Get it?" Needless to say, Frank loved the idea. In lieu of anything better, I went along with the bit in order to spend more time with Brick, until I could decide whether he was capable of not only overpowering, but killing my best friend. In a last-ditch attempt to share the embarrassment, I sold Frank on having Marty accompany me to the ring as my Watson. It would allow us to spend some time together rebuilding our once great friendship. On my way backstage, Jericho Blaze tapped me on the shoulder and reminded me that he had a receipt for me. I offered to let him slug me there and then, but he wanted it on camera so he could savor it long after retirement. The locker room emptied in small groups of ones and twos, and we all walked to the ring free of any character or bravado. It was a somber moment, a moment that sobered the soul as the tribute video dedicated to the career of Nina Valentine played. Gone before her time, cut short in the most wrestling of ways. Frank said a few words, and everyone in the theater bowed their heads for 10 rings of the bell. I stood shoulder to shoulder with giants reduced to babies. Sobs rippled across the ring from those whose characters allowed it. We exited the ring and took ourselves backstage. I watched on a monitor as lover boy Luke Pincer made his way to the ring for the opening bout of the evening. He was working with the grandson of a wrestling great, Herb Brenner. To hear some of the old-timers talk about Herb would have curled your hair. Herb used to take a dump before every match, then grab a handful of it and rub it into his armpits. When the bell rang and the bout got underway, the first thing he'd do was to tie his opponent up in a headlock and grind it into the poor bastard. I watched Pincer versus George Brenner and knew inside of 2 minutes that Herb's grandson could have done with a few headlocks. Luke got the pin, and nobody really seemed to care. That worried me. Mr. Magnificent and Rita were up next, which meant they had about 7 minutes to warm up this crowd before my ring-rusty ass had to cross the curtain. Magnificent played it, as well as his name suggested. He cussed out the audience before turning his scorn on Rita for losing his cape. He called her just about every name under the sun, and she begged and pleaded her innocence. That was my cue. Delia was at the curtain. She handed me a deerstalker cap, which she'd run out and got from a costume store. I thanked her through gritted teeth before putting it on, then took 3 steps back and tore through the curtain. The audience erupted into cheers, howls, before the confusion set in. What the fuck is he wearing? Why is marvelous Marty Monroe walking with a cane? What in the fucking hell is all this? I played the part the kids came up with for me, hitting all the beats they'd worked out to showcase my amazing powers of deduction. I broke it down for the audience, how Mr. Magnificent arrived at the theater in his cape. But by the time he was on Pawnee Rock today, talking shit about being the greatest wrestler alive, he was without it. Then there was the pudding cup. You see, I said, I couldn't happen but notice that you had an extra pudding cup at lunch, and when you finally filled that fat little belly of yours, you instinctively wiped those dirty little mitts on your cape. I paused for the shocked reaction that Delia had assured me would come with this reveal. After a few seconds of catching dead air, I explained that Rita had taken it to the dry cleaners, and then, in an effort to make him look stupid and win the affections of Delia, Brick Hansen had stolen it. Brick entered the auditorium playing incensed but wearing Magnificent's cape. I turned and hightailed it back up the ramp. The bit had died on its ass. I threw Delia a look that could have stripped the brows clean off her face. Headlock Holmes, what a stupid idea. I had held the GCW Tag Team title, North American and World Championships. I had wrestled in a barbed wire ring and an insane fucking fire pit. I had been the lone Wolf Jack Gecko, one of the coolest characters in wrestling history, and my last appearance on screen was going to be Headlock Holmes. I got backstage, marched straight to the locker room, and sank to the bench with my head in my hands. Marty entered moments later, followed by Jericho. Blaze sat down beside me and smacked me on the knee. That receipt I owe you. Don't worry about it, he said, which only made me feel worse.